welcome to the show, everyone. This is Everything Under the Sun. My name is Ty, and I'm so happy you can join me. This has been a great week. It's been fast, so I think that that's back to normal, unlike the last week, which went by terribly slow, but this week definitely went by a lot faster. I can't really say that that's a good or bad thing because, time going faster and all that, but, it's definitely, I think it's kind of getting more into a groove type of thing. There's been a lot happening nonetheless, like that would make it feel like it's been just an exceptionally long time, but it hasn't been as long as I would think. I got into a little fender bender a few weeks back. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in previous podcasts, but everyone was right. It wasn't a big situation at all. But when my car went to get in for an estimate of the damages, again, like these are purely cosmetic damages, I thought it would cost a couple $100. They estimated it at like a few $1,000s, and essentially that caused it to make it so that my car was deemed to be, what they called it, a total loss. So since that's the case, I have to get a new car, and it's definitely unexpected. It's definitely not something I wanted to do right now, but it's going to be something that I guess has to be done. And as I'm thinking about this whole idea of change and everything happening, I can't help but feel that this is part of that change. And I feel like this situation has been kind of just frustrating, but I feel like a lot of the frustration and anger has been somewhat like forced by me. Like I kind of reflect on the feeling that I'm having, and I'm like, you know what? I don't think I'm actually this angry. Like I'm not this upset, and I feel like I'm like trying to match what I should feel the situation to be like, or the amount of anger I should feel in the situation, but it's not really like matching internally. So I don't know. It's been interesting to kind of reflect on that and see that I guess maybe I've changed in that way where this idea of going with the flow of like the river rather than going against it. It's been something that's been kind of just on my mind for a while, and I mean this has been like something I've been trying to practice for so long, since I've heard it years ago, but I'm noticing it starting to come to fruition when I think about these situations like this where I would be very upset of the fact that this incident that was caused not by me, and the outcome being that I have to buy a new car out of it, and all just within the past like 2 weeks. So it's all very sudden, and I feel like if I were in this situation like maybe a year ago, I would not have been okay with this. So I think that there's just a lot of change that I'm noticing within that, and I think it's just like good to notice those things within ourselves. Like each of us have had those experiences where somebody pisses us off, or somebody does some kind of thing that would normally make us very, very upset, but then we notice that we've come to a point in our lives where we're not getting that upset anymore. It's like I don't really care that much about you or the situation that it's going to influence what I want to feel for myself. So I think that a lot of us definitely get glimpses of that, but it's always good to notice because that's how far you've come. Those are steps and improvements and things that you've made within yourself to make sure that you stay in a place that keeps you okay. And again, like it's a lifelong process, so it's something that we're all going to have to keep working on. So that's something that I don't know. I think that that's just something that I noticed throughout my week, and as I've been looking at this whole situation. So go with the river and not against it. I mean, but also salmon go against the current, and they're super strong. And apparently, I mean, I'm vegan, so I don't eat fish, but apparently if you do eat fish, salmon, like wild caught salmon, is actually some of the best fish that you can eat because of the fact that they swim through so many different riverways and water currents, and as they're going through that, they're also eating a lot of the microbacteria and things like that live in the water. So if you eat a salmon that's like made its way all the way to its destination, then it's traveled through like thousands of miles of just different waterways which have essential minerals and nutrients and things inside of it. So they actually have just like an abundance of like all these essential vitamins and nutrients inside of them, from what I was just told like a few days ago. So I didn't take time to research that yourself. Any information that you get, you should always like research that shit yourself, because you never know what people are going to feed you, and you have to take everything with a grain of salt. So everything that I tell you, don't listen to this shit. I'm kidding. Well, I mean, listen to it as you want, but also take everything with a grain of salt, because every life is individual. Your life is very individual and unique to you. So think about all these things that even that I say, they're all just things that are coming from my point of view, or from just research or articles or stuff, which is essentially just someone else's point of view. All research comes from an angle of the scientist or the researcher has kind of an idea of what they want to see out of the experiment. So I think there's some kind of bias in that in some ways. And I mean, research also tries so many ways to ameliorate that and kind of just like keep that from influencing the outcome. But no matter what, if you have an idea for what you want an experiment to come out to or what you want an outcome to come out to, then there's going to be some kind of bias in there. So everything is someone else's opinion. So what I'm saying is just get a lot of opinions and then form an opinion of your own based off of what you feel is more in line with what you think. So long story short, I have to get a new car. And that's going to be an interesting little venture that I go on. So that's that. I haven't really been doing too much. I mean, I've been still kind of working on those renovations on that travel trailer, and it's been going really well. It's I'm starting to see my vision come to life. Other than that, I've been spending my nights watching Ozark, and that's been kind of my binge recently. And I don't know why I didn't get into this show recently. I mean until recently, but it's definitely a good show. I'm not sure if any of you watched it, but the main person is Jason Bateman. He's the main actor in it, and he's also the director of it, which is something that I recently found out. It was like the beginning of the second season when I actually decided to pay attention to the opening credits, and it was saying director Jason Bateman. I was like, oh shit, like he's a director and the main person in it. But yeah, directed and written really well, produced very well. So check it out if you have nothing else to watch. I kind of keep getting stuck watching more and more episodes, and it doesn't help that they're an hour long. And either way, I've been staying up until 1 o'clock watching the show. So it's been, I mean, that's not as late as I've stayed up before watching things, but I think I'm kind of just going a little too far into it. Check it out if you want to, if you have nothing else to watch. I'm gonna have to try to figure out something else to watch because I know that I always get kind of this weird anxiety when it comes to a show that I really like that I'm binge watching, and it's like close to the end of it, and I'm like, damn, like I should just hold off. And there have been times where I've held off watching the last episode for weeks just so that I didn't have to actually be done with the show. But I think that's just like that's neither here nor there. So I'm gonna shake this box up and get a topic for next week out because that's what is the thing. Yeah. Should be interesting to figure out what's going to be the next topic. And it looks like hobbies. Okay, hobbies, interesting topic. I think I mentioned this before about just hobbies and how I'd never really had many hobbies in my life, and it wasn't until recently that I started kind of taking in more hobbies and things like that, and it's really interesting, like the impact that this has. I didn't really realize that until after I started gaining more hobbies, that I realized, wow, like there are things that I'm interested in that I just haven't explored. There are things that I am talented in. There are things that I'm good at doing that I haven't known until I started exploring these things. So I think hobbies is a really good topic because it not only explains the things that are meaningful to us and things that we feel for ourselves, but it also can help us to understand the strengths and the value of the different aspects of who we are and what that means. So it can gain a lot more clarity for just like so many different topics. There was a post that I posted on Instagram recently actually about kind of moving towards your happiness and doing more things that bring you happiness, and I think that hobbies is included in this. And as we move towards the things that bring us more happiness, I think that we're living more in a life that's true to who we are because we're living in our happiness. So I think that hobbies is going to be a very interesting topic, and I think that I'm excited to see where that goes. So sorry, I just hit the microphone. Anyway, today we're talking about drugs and alcohol. And there are a few things with that. First off, like I mentioned last episode, alcohol is definitely a drug. So, I mean, that's just what that is. It should just be called drugs. But I feel like drugs and alcohol has been something that we've kind of seen written out that way. Like sex, drugs, and alcohol, or sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or I guess, alcohol is included in that. But anyway, alcohol is a drug. It's actual a thing. But another funny thing about this episode is that it's the 21st episode. So, I mean, technically, if you're looking on your podcast platform, you might see a lot more episodes, but that's because there are follow up episodes and adjunct episodes and things like that that are included. But this is the actual 21st official full episode, and I don't know, I guess just kind of convenient that it fell on drugs and alcohol, and this was again just randomly out of the box. So I think that was just another cool thing with just this episode. I mean, although like 21 is just the age of drinking in the United States, it's not always that way in every other country. But I just thought it was interesting. You can think whatever about it. But one thing I was thinking about when I was thinking about this topic was, I don't know if you remember, any of you, or if your schools had this program. It was called the DARE program. Essentially to agree to not do drugs. D, I won't do drugs. A, won't have an attitude. R, I will respect myself. E, educate me now. Woo! That's the Dare song that we were taught, and for all of you that don't know, I'm terribly tone deaf, so hope your ears didn't start bleeding because of that. But yeah, I don't know if any of you remember that program, and we all got our pens out and read the oath and signed our names on it, and we were like, yeah, like we're signing something. We're signing it, and then years later, someone said, "Hey, you want a beer?" And we took that first sip and we broke that oath. And that's basically where it went downhill from there. So that Dare program, I'm not even sure if they still do that with kids now, probably because they know that that oath is being broken by so many people daily. But so the Dare program was something that we all did, and I still have my shirt. It's back at home with my mom, but yeah, every time I see it, I'm like, geez, like if I only knew now what I knew then, I don't know if I would have signed that oath. I mean, it was, I think it's more or less just like it's supposed to be like a pledge to not do drugs or anything like that. But I guess I pledged it and I signed it, and many of us have signed it and we lied because I guess we didn't know what we know now. So that was that was just an interesting thing that I was thinking about as I thought about this topic, because I mean, hey, we've all had a history of doing something, and I mean, like, I've actually met some people that haven't ever tried any drugs or had a sip of alcohol, which I think is really just amazing. And I think the worst part of it all is that I find it amazing, and that just speaks to like our culture, our society, and maybe just my mindset of where I'm, what I've previously believed in my life, to think that this was something that was so normalized, something that was just like, hey, we're in college, and you know just have fun and things like that. And I got out of that kind of like mindset and started meeting people from different walks of life, and realizing that not everyone has tried that, not everyone is even wanting to try that or anything like that. So it's just really interesting, and I think that as we consider this topic of drugs and alcohol, or just drugs in general, we have to realize that just because we partake in something doesn't mean other people do, and just because we partake moderately doesn't mean other people partake moderately either. Some people partake heavily, and we have to look at this as a spectrum. Like most things, it's like there is this bell curve that's present, where there are extreme cases on both ends, where there are people that have never done a drug, and there are people that have they're doing it all day, every day, constantly. And there's that obviously middle ground where a lot of people live, where it's more of a casual use or more of a social type of use that we use these things. But it's all very relevant, and I think it brings us more compassion as we think about things on a spectrum, because a lot of times, like, we can get drunk on the weekend yet look poorly on like some homeless person that may be on some drugs and maybe asking for money for alcohol or something like that, and we can look down on them as if like they're not just on a different point of the spectrum than we are. And I think that that's something that can help us to humanize each other as well as we think about this topic. Is just because I'm not using that much doesn't mean I've never drank alcohol. It doesn't mean I've never been like super trashed in that way. So although I'm not maybe like high on some amphetamine or something, like, it doesn't mean that I haven't been under the influence of something, and it just brings more compassion to the situation. So to start this off, I'm just gonna list all the drugs that have ever been created. No, but there are different types of drugs that, I mean, we all know there are pharmaceutical drugs, which are all different drugs, and there are obviously the more street drugs, or party drugs, that many people may speak about, or whatever term you speak of them in. But pharmaceutical drugs are more or less just like the ones that are the over-counter medicines, Tylenol, Advil, like these are all drugs as well, but there are ones that are prescribed as well, like Xanax, Valium, Ativan, Klonopin. These are drugs that are more or less that are prescribed, but they're also drugs. I mean, and I think that a lot of times we remove the idea of pharmaceutical drugs from being actual drugs. We call them pharmaceuticals or just pills or medicine or whatever it is. And at the end of the day, it's a drug, and they're all drugs, and they have side effects just like any other drug does. So before I kind of get into this, the drugs are classified. I'm not going to go too much in detail with this because you can look up this yourself. But drugs are classified into different categories. So depressants, stimulants, opiates, hallucinogens, and things like that. Sometimes opiates are classified under, like some of the opiates are classified under depressants and things like that. And these categories are essentially just an influence on what these drugs do to your central nervous system, specifically with stimulants and depressants. And depressants are things that depress activity in your central nervous system. So these are generally prescribed to individuals with high anxiety or things like that, like Xanax and Valium. It's more of a calming thing. So there's a lot of activity in the central nervous system of individuals that are experiencing high anxiety. So these depressants are meant to prescribe to kind of depress a lot of those symptoms. Stimulants do the exact opposite. And some stimulants include Ativan, Concerta, Ritalin. These are drugs that many people have been prescribed or know of for whatever reasons that you know of for them, but these are ones that are prescribed by doctors and physicians and psychiatrists, and these are the ones that many people may know about. But there are also so many different things that start to merge together when it comes to pharmaceutical drugs and the drugs that people may see on the streets. And that's specifically, I think a lot of ones that we see specifically are opiates. And there are, Oxycontin, there's morphine, there's fentanyl, and that's something that has become more of a problem with just there have been a lot of cases of people dying because of drugs that have been laced with fentanyl. And fentanyl is essentially a very, very strong opiate. It's almost 10 times higher, 10 times stronger than oxy in some cases, depending on like the dosage of it. And that's really like the biggest problem when it comes to us speaking about this topic. There was a big I want to say it was a Senate hearing or something regarding the use of opiates and how doctors are prescribing these opiates to individuals. And before, it wasn't a problem because it was, and I say it wasn't a problem like in quotes and like a not good way. They said they didn't see it as being a problem when it only included individuals in low income or that were homeless, like in poverty level. So it wasn't a problem then because people were using heroin and opiates and things like that during that time. But recently, in the past like 10 years or so, it's been increasingly coming in middle class families. And the biggest part of that is that is when it started becoming a problem for people in, our country, which is kind of sad to think about because there are plenty of people suffering before. But again, like this just showed that there is an increase in problems of drug use and with individuals that aren't necessarily going to, like the corner for heroin or something. So where did this problem start? And the problem started with doctors prescribing their patients oxy for like a sprained ankle or something. And the biggest part of that too is that they would prescribe this to, again, individuals in like middle class income rather than low poverty, because if you're in low poverty, you're probably going to get prescribed like ibuprofen or like a Tylenol or something, or just be sent home telling you to like ice and rest. But as you go into like different social classes, you're going to be prescribed different things. Like you're not going to get the generic drug, you're probably going to get like the real actual drug. So they started seeing that more and more people in middle class families started being affected by this opiate pandemic, and not only switching from opiates, because the problem also with opiates is that they'll give you a 30-day prescription and have no refills. And the thing with opiates too, I'm gonna go into like a little rant here. And one thing that I do want to apologize for, last episode on space, I went to a rant and I spoke super fast, and I've been thinking about it all week, so I'm sorry about that if that was confusing or if I was just speaking so fast. So I'm going to try to slow down and not speak so fast. I get excited about things and I just start speaking fast. So Sorry about that. But the thing about opiates is that we have opiate receptors already. We already have opiate receptors naturally in our body. And the problem with that is that, let's say that our opiate receptor is a shape of a square, and the natural opiates that we produce are square shaped. So the square fits obviously into the receptor perfectly, like a key in a lock. The thing that happens with opiates, if someone gets prescribed Oxycontin, then they're inducing opiates to be produced, and like causing more opiates to reduce. And with that, the drug itself, let's say that Oxy, you take it and it's like a square with the corners cut off. So it still fits in there like a key in a lock, but it's slightly different. But it tricks your body into starting to create more opiate receptors. And that's a problem because when you create more opiate receptors, that means your body's going to want more opiates. So individuals are getting 30-day prescriptions of these of Oxycontin or morphine or whatever it is, and they're getting a 30-day prescription there with no refills. So they're taking this drug, their opiate receptors are multiplying, and now they're out of drugs, and they can't refill their drugs because their doctor said they can't refill it. So now they have opiate receptors that are causing physical pain, causing physical disruption in your body because it's causing a physical craving in your body because you have all these receptors now and they're not able to be filled. So that's kind of where that line of addiction happens. And with opiates, it's unfortunately like almost an instant addiction where, because of the fact that we have opiate receptors already, it's going to make it so that it's so much harder for us to kind of knock that habit. So opiates are very dangerous, and doctors know this. They know that medication needs to be titrated off of, and titration is essentially just a lowering of dosage. It's kind of like if you go on antibiotics, they tell you to, like, you start with one pill or something, and then you start taking like two, and then like you go back down to like taking one, but eventually like it's supposed to like slowly lower the dosage, and that's so that your body can kind of keep up with the changes that are happening chemically. So doctors know this, yet they prescribe these individuals with a 30-day supply with no refills, knowing that they're going to crave more. So now they're prescribing it to like individuals that are in middle class income again, and now these individuals have no more drugs. They can't fill their prescription, yet they have that craving still. And it's like they feel pain in whatever way, and maybe they haven't been keeping any type of tolerance of their pain because there's been substance. So now they're just like feeling pain constantly, or whatever it is that they're feeling, just an initial craving for more opiates. So now they turn to maybe their friend that they know sells some weed, and they're like, hey, do you know anyone else that may have something stronger? And that's kind of just like where they start associating with different people and getting street drugs like heroin and things like that, because again, like, it's cheaper and it does essentially the same exact thing. So it's very dangerous, and that's kind of where we have to like look at pharmaceutical drugs and see how they start influencing us in different ways, not only just like the party drugs like cocaine and MDMA and things like that. These are drugs that are being prescribed by doctors. So that's kind of where that is. And I guess just for reference again, just like there are the party type of drugs or the social drugs or the non-pharmaceutical drugs that people take part in, and that's like alcohol. Again, alcohol is a drug. Heroin, like I said. And these are depressants. These are ones that are typically described as depressants, just like the pharmaceutical drugs. So like Xanax, Valium. Alcohol is also a depressant. Heroin, also a depressant. Well, it's actually an opiate, but again, like, sometimes people put opiates in the category of depressants. Stimulants include things like MDMA, again, like ecstasy, that's what that is, cocaine, crack cocaine, speed, or any kind of methamphetamine, and caffeine and nicotine. As many people may not even know, like, caffeine and nicotine are both drugs as well. And caffeine is actually the number one drug in the world that's used, which I thought was surprising because I thought it was going to be alcohol. But it makes sense because those people that have never tried drugs or alcohol, they may drink coffee. And it's kind of just crazy when you think about caffeine being a drug, because they may drink coffee, they may drink tea, but like, would we say that they're doing drugs? Yet they are considered drugs. It's kind of just weird, the slippery slope that drugs exist on. And that's kind of where, as I was speaking about earlier, we have to look at things with a critical eye and take all the information that we can from for ourselves and start making an informed decision for ourselves. And that's kind of just like how we have to make these decisions, because everything's not going to apply to everyone. And there's this other category of hallucinogens like I spoke about earlier, and many of you may know cannabis, weed. It used to be considered a depressant, and now it's considered a hallucinogen. So even as we classify things on a federal level, there's still so much ambiguity into, like, okay, what is this actually causing? So that's kind of where we have to just learn about it for ourselves and then make an informed decision based on what we know. So again, just some of those hallucinogens. Ketamine is a hallucinogen, which I thought, again, was like more of a depressant or something, but they classified that as a hallucinogen, so that's really interesting. And hallucinogens are more classified the way they are because they are said to have psychoactive effects for the individuals that take it in low to moderate doses. So ketamine is something that's hallucinogen. Psilocybin, magic mushrooms, is another hallucinogen that many people may be familiar with. LSD or acid is another one, and cannabis, weed, yeah, that's another hallucinogen technically. And I mean, I think a lot of times too, there are so many people that I know. I live in Humboldt, and many people may not know of Humboldt, but maybe if you've saw, what's that show? Oh, Murder Mountain on Netflix. It's completely, I feel like there's just so much BS that's in that documentary. I remember my mom watched it. She knew I came to Humboldt. I was here for like 3 years. I came to Humboldt. That documentary came out, and I knew my mom watched it because randomly she sends me a message. She was like, "Hey, this is where you live, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, did you watch Murder Mountain?" I was like literally in the next message, because I knew like just the criticism that came from that documentary or that docu-series or whatever it was. And I feel like there was just like a lot of just stuff that was more embellished, that wasn't really necessarily speaking to the true nature of this area. People come up here with their families to vacation. There are abundance of trees and beauty, and it's just, there's a lot that's happening outside of what's happening in the cannabis industry. And even in the cannabis industry, most places are legalized, like very safe cannabis farms and things like that, and they have to be because of state regulations. But again, like, it was speaking to a very small area, specifically like Alder Point area in this documentary of Murder Mountain. But Alder Point is like this area that I guess is a little more raunchy in terms of, being off the grid and stuff. But I've never been there. I've maybe driven past it. It's still a very beautiful, area, but you know people like a story to tell. So anyway, the point is, I live in Humboldt, and there's a lot of weed up here. And so there are a lot of people that don't consider cannabis to be a drug at all. They consider it to be medicine. And a lot of people do use it for medicine, whether it's for help with seizures, help with, stress and anxiety. I mean, those are real issues. Like, people don't like to consider, stress, anxiety, and depression to be serious issues because they can't see them. And that's so wrong because these are the things that impact our lives in so many ways. So there are people that use this for medicine, and I think that's, again, why we have to look at these substances. And I mean, even psilocybin and MDMA is being utilized as medicine in different practices now. So I feel like even the shift in what we classify as being different drugs is going to transform as we gain more information about them, and as we gain more understanding in just what exactly they mean and what they do for us, and how we want to classify this. But again, I think that, we should be able to classify them individually on our own perspective, because why should we let anyone on a federal level just tell us how we should classify certain things? Obviously, there's science behind some of it, but there are also other things where it's like we can take it with our own discretion and decide for ourselves, because we are intelligent, thinking human beings, and given the opportunity, we can make the decisions that are right for ourselves. So that's neither here nor there. But the point is that there are all these substances that we use, whether we're prescribed it, whether we just use it because we've been in school, or we're like around other people and we just want to have fun, or whatever it is. But we all use substances, and that's why I wanted this episode to be something that wasn't necessarily judgmental. It was more or less just speaking about this topic and how the greater we can understand this, the greater we can understand how it impacts our lives and ourselves, we can start relating it and translating it to the world outside of us, and doing something about like how we're treating individuals that are impacted by these substances, or how we even are impacted by these substances. And it's kind of crazy because we're not always able to see the impact that we have, or the impact that these substances have over us in different capacities. And an example of this was a friend of mine we were having a conversation about something, and the idea of like coping mechanisms came up, and my friend was saying that I was using cannabis as a coping mechanism, and I was like, no, I just like to smoke weed. And this was like a few years ago, and I was like, no, I just like to smoke weed, like there's no coping mechanism involved in that. But it stuck with me for a while, like like, and when I have things that stick with me after the situation has gone by, and they just stay with me and I keep thinking about it, I investigate that, because there must be something there that's keeping it on my mind. That's what I do with all things that keep perpetuating, keep coming up. I have to investigate it, because I'm like, this keeps popping up. There has to be something to it. So with this question of me using weed as a coping mechanism, I had to question that, and I was very defensive of it, and I thought to myself, what if I'm not seeing another perspective? So I opened my eyes to the fact that what if this is a coping mechanism? How could this be seen as a coping mechanism? And I thought back to a situation I had where I was an undergrad, and I got to a point where I would smoke every night and go to bed. And it got to a point where if I didn't smoke at night, I wouldn't be able to sleep. I'd be tossing and turning all night, and I realized that that was a problem, that I had to stop smoking at night altogether, and then just get back into a normal sleeping pattern, because otherwise I was dependent on weed in order to fall asleep. So I applied that, and I was like, that was definitely not necessarily a coping strategy, but I mean, it helps to produce an outcome that I wanted, and I guess in a way that maybe coping, produce a change in some kind of state that I wanted to see. So I applied that in my current situation. I was like, okay, sometimes I've been stressed and wanted to come home and smoke. Sometimes I've been, just in different situations, and realized that, like, I wanted to smoke. Maybe I was bored and just wanted to smoke. And either way, like, these are all coping mechanisms. It's coping with boredom. It's coping with, stress. It's coping with whatever it is. And we all use things to cope in different ways, whether it's a substance like, weed, or maybe alcohol for a lot of people. Maybe it's Netflix. Maybe it's eating. There are so many different things that we use for coping, but it's not until we recognize what we're using it for that we can do anything about it. And again, like, this long time example that I've been using is the fact that we have to uncover these things before we can actually do anything with it. We have to shovel it out, we have to dig it, we have to identify it, we have to hold it, and then we can decide to do something with it. But as long as we're using substances just to use them and not realizing what we're using them for, then we can't really do anything about them if we want to do something about it. And a lot of times, things may not seem like it's a problem to us and may not influence our lives, and that's kind of when, again, like, we have to take our own perspective and say, this isn't a problem for me. And again, like, it's not a problem until it's a problem. But people with problems with substances, a lot of times they recognize that it's a problem, but they don't recognize it to the point that it's a problem that I need to stop right now because it's helping me in the situation. And that's the biggest thing, is that when we use substances and we see individuals that are using substances chronically, there is a lot of pain involved. And then, I mean, there's a lot of other things that are involved in that use, and that's what we need to understand. And as we understand it with ourselves, and however level of use that we use it, we can start to apply that, saying that, okay, if I use it in this level and I know that, I have my things that I struggle with, imagine people that are struggling with so many other things, so many other interpersonal conflicts that they have within themselves, struggling with just the perpetuation of drug use throughout their entire life, and maybe this is something that was brought onto them before they were even old enough to know the difference between, like, what they should and shouldn't be doing. And I'm not saying that, like, you should and shouldn't do drugs. I mean, do whatever you feel like you need for yourself, but just do things with a grain of salt, and know that know what the consequences are of your actions, and that can be a line of addiction. So I'm not gonna go too much into that, but the point is, we all use substances, and the more we understand that, the more we can apply it to others outside of us and have this compassion, and I think that that's the biggest thing is just compassion for other people, and just allowing them to be seen. And something I keep going back to is this study that was done in Portugal, and it was a longitudinal study based on a decision that was made by the Portuguese government to decriminalize drug use. And this happened in 2001, and they did this with a few other things in place, but they found that there were significant changes to their drug use in the country because there were high HIV infections, hepatitis B and C infections, a lot of drug related deaths, and they found that they decriminalized drugs, among other things, which I'm going to go into in a minute. But they decriminalized drugs, and they found that there was a significant decrease in HIV infections and drug related deaths. But again, like, they not only included a policy to decriminalize, they also started shifting more towards a health-centered approach to the people that are actually influenced by drug use. And one thing was that they didn't require anyone, like, they didn't force anyone to go to treatment. They felt as though that treatment should be voluntary, like people should willingly go to treatment, and that's something true. You can't force somebody to change. You can't force somebody to do anything. They have to want that for themselves. And again, it comes to a point where it's like, if you're on a substance or you're using a substance, there may be some recognition. Even if you continue to use it, there may still be recognition that I don't want to do this. Like, this is something that I know is not good for me, yet the pros outweigh the cons. And when the pros of numbness and forgetting and blocking it out, when those are the pros, and that is, that outweighs all the cons of you knowing that it's not good for you, you knowing that you don't want to do it, you knowing that it's causing this social distance between you and other people that you love and care about, all these things, and there's a long list of cons. But yes, yet the pros are that you get to be alleviated from this pain, that you get to have some relief from this angst or whatever it is that you're feeling. And I think that that's something that needs to be understood, is that those cons need to be weighed more heavily than the pros in order for someone to seek help in any type of situation. And in this act of what the Portuguese people did, they found that, okay, this isn't something that's going to help them to force treatment upon them. And they also found that criminalizing them and marginalizing them added to the problem itself. So putting them in jail and, discarding them from society and not paying them any attention and turning the other way, it causes them to do more drugs and continues to perpetuate this problem that they're trying to ameliorate. So they found that, okay, let's stop putting them in jail and let's stop marginalizing them. They started creating programs to allocate expenses towards prevention, treatment, and harm reduction, as well as creating social reintegration programs, so helping them to get reintegrated back into society. And that's something that's so big. There was research done recently on homeless individuals and how there's a dehumanizing factor in the fact that other humans will not pay them attention, will divert their eyes intentionally, will not share a smile, will not do anything in that regard to these people that maybe are just low income, or maybe they are using substances in different degrees, but people pick up on things. People aren't necessarily just completely oblivious to things just because they're on a substance or just because they're homeless. They pick up on these things, and as we dissociate from them, as we remove ourselves from them and do these blatant and overt acts of aversion from them, they pick up on that, and it starts to influence psychological states. It starts to dehumanize them in that way, make them feel like they don't exist. They make them feel like they're kind of the invisible population, and it causes more of this problem, more of this perpetuation of just pain and suffering, and obviously drug use that comes out of it. So, and of course that's not the only thing that causes drug use, but it's just something that we have to think about as we move about in society, that marginalizing people for the things that they're experiencing can perpetuate that problem even more, instead of doing what people may think ignoring them does, which it doesn't help. It doesn't help at the end of that. So they create these social reintegration programs to help individuals to reintegrate back in society, to be welcomed back into society, and to have a community that's there to support them and be there for them. And on top of it all, they added this Portuguese welfare state thing where essentially they guaranteed minimum income for individuals. So no one has to worry about being able to feed themselves or being able to put clothes on their back or a roof over their head. Everyone has a minimum income that they're generating no matter what. And I mean, think about that. If people didn't have to worry about money, then there would be so many other opportunities that are opened up for individuals. So this study was something that was done again, like it was looking at this from 2001 and the effects of that since then. And there again, like there's been a decrease in HIV infections and drug related deaths. There's been a decrease in drug use in individuals 15 to 24 years old, which were the highest population utilizing drugs. There was an increase in lifetime drug use, but it's not really accurate in speaking about the current drug use for the place. So that's something that just has to be looked at with a critical eye as well as you look at that increase. Just because it's a lifetime increase doesn't mean that more people are actually using it in that specific moment. So that was just kind of like a short breakdown of a few of the topics that were covered in that study. If you want to get some more information on that, you can go to transformdrugs.org. But in general, the takeaway point is we all use substances, whether it's prescribed substances, whether it's, party substances or, alcohol or whatever it is. We all use substances and we all use them in different degrees. And on that same scale, there are individuals that use it every day, perpetually, and it's for a certain reason, to cope with something, to deal with something. And in that, we have to gain compassion because these are other humans that we're speaking about. These are other lives that we're speaking about that are impacted by this in different ways. So I'm not saying that, you have to give all your money to, drug programs or do anything like that. Just to think about this with a critical eye. Think about it for yourself. Think about it for those that you care about. Maybe you're dealing with individuals, a family member, friends that are experiencing significant drug use and you don't know how to interact with them. Interact with them with compassion, with love. You don't have to give them money to support their drug habits, but be there to support them, and always saying that I love you, I'm here for you. That it can mean so much. And as long as you are constantly there for them, maybe one day they will decide, I do want to change for myself. Maybe they will look at those cons and be a little bit more critical of them and kind of weigh them a little more heavily and say, you said you'll always be here for me and I think I want to change. And maybe they just used a substance earlier that day. Maybe they just used substance just before telling you that. But be there for them. Be there for them through the process because it's a crazy process. It's a slippery slope so many times, and rehabilitation, it's a cycle, and it's something that has to be worked towards. It's not something that people could just recover with overnight. So be there for them, have compassion, and part of that compassion comes from that understanding and that relation that we have to it. And I think that we always have to try to put ourselves in other people's shoes, and the only way we can do that is to start by these baby steps of understanding how we use substances and how that may just be on a different scale for other people. And this is a huge topic that is, there are people's lives that have been changed just enormously by drugs, and it's not something that can be solved overnight. So understand that there is a process that's involved with this. This is something that has so many factors involved with it that we can't really generalize it. And I don't want the information that I presented about the Portuguese study or anything that I've said to make it seem like I'm generalizing in any type of way. Again, research things, look at things with a critical eye, but compassion, understanding, and just basic human connection can be so meaningful in working with individuals and helping yourself even to deal with some of these issues that may come up around drugs and alcohol. Now, I'm not saying not to use drugs. It's been a hell of a year so far. So hell, open that bottle of wine, take some shots of tequila if you want, smoke some weed, do what you need to do to be okay for yourself, but also just recognize things. I mean, I still smoke weed every now and then, and it's something that I have to recognize where it's like, okay, I was stressed out, so I'm smoking this weed, and now I recognize that this is a coping mechanism in some way. I'm not gonna be thinking about that as I'm smoking weed, obviously, but it's just something that we can start attributing and creating certain factors, and as we start building that narrative in our head, we can start, applying that narrative to the world outside of us. And that's kind of just where I think I wanted to kind of go with this, is that, yeah, again, we all use things, other people use things, and we all use it for different reasons. So have compassion, have love, be supportive, and that's all I got. So, yeah, that's it. If any of you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or anyone want to submit any topics, you can go to everything.sunpodcast@gmail.com and submit any of those topics or thoughts. You can go to the Instagram page at everything.sunpodcast. You can go to the Twitter page at everysunpodcast, or you can join the Facebook group at Everything Under the Sun with Ty. And yeah, again, that's all I got. Hope you all enjoyed. Enjoy the rest of your week. Love you all, and I will see you next time.